I love that question. I could talk about it forever. That's like picking your favorite child or your favorite dog. It's impossible.
Women like you have paved the way for younger women like me, and that is why
I'm going to start with a really personal example, probably the most personal example because it's about me. I'm going to cheat a little bit.
women often get the shorter end of the stick. As controversial as it might sound, but it is true in a professional world. But yes, things are changing for the better, and our guest today has a pivotal role to play in it. She is a brilliant leader who is driven to see more and more women achieve their career dreams. She is very passionate about gender diversity in workforce. She is the founder and president of Leadership One, the program that helps companies retain and advance their women technologists with proven results. I'm very thrilled to have you on my most special video series, Women of Steel. Welcome Susan.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Thank you for taking out the time to talk with me. So let's start with the questions. How did you become passionate about gender diversity and advancing women in their careers? How was Leadership One born?
I love that question. I could talk about it forever, but I'm going to give you the short answer. When I think about how I became passionate about gender diversity, I can't remember a time when I wasn't. And I think a lot of that comes from being raised by a very strong feminist mom who taught me about the value of women from birth. We had a very strong, dominant feminist culture in our family. And so I think that was just always sort of part of me. And when I entered the workforce, I entered with a lot of confidence because I grew up with a mother who told me I could do anything, and I believed her. And so I never lacked for confidence. I was very successful in school and entered the workforce after completing my PhD and was ready to just take the world by storm. And I got very, very fortunate in that my experience in gender diversity was all quite positive. I worked with men who were mentors and sponsors and advocates for me. And I was the youngest and only female on our executive team. Got to that role in my mid-30s, so pretty early, and always felt incredibly supported. I had a team that I managed of about 100 people. Most of my direct reports were women, so I never saw that women couldn't be successful. I didn't see all issues around gender diversity in my own experience. However, big however, because I'm a social psychologist by training and I am an avid learner in life and was fascinated with the concepts of leadership and work culture and all those things I sort of studied in my graduate program, I started to see how those played out in the real world. And the more I read, the more I realized that my personal experience was not the experience of all women. And that the women on my team, it was not the experience of all women. So we had this microcosm of a really great work environment. But as I read more and learned more, I found that that wasn't true for all women. And the pivotal part for me in starting Leadership One happened in 2005. I read a Harvard Business Review article by the brilliant Sylvia Ann Hewlett, who's written so many brilliant books. And she wrote an article called The On-Ramps and Off-Ramps. And it was the first time that I really deeply understood that women were leaving the workforce in unacceptable numbers. And especially in tech, these are women who had worked hard, gone to school, started their careers, and they got to this midpoint in their career and they were dropping out. And I found that shocking and fascinating and unacceptable. And I decided that if I could play the smallest part in that, in helping women want to stay in the workforce, to be able to stay in the workforce, to have the culture where they could thrive, that was going to be sort of my next chapter of my life's work. So I left a job that I loved. I love being a corporate executive, but my passion for playing my small role and how we could retain and advance women was just an absolute strong conviction that I had to follow. And that was 15 years ago, and here we are.
Wow, that's fascinating, really. So how long has it been for you in the workforce?
Yeah, so I always think of it as sort of two phases of my career. So I completed my PhD program and spent 10 years in a corporate setting as a corporate leader. And I've now spent 15 years running Leadership One.
Wow, those are some real goals there for all of us. Awesome. So could you share some examples of the impact that you have seen when women are given more opportunities to grow in their careers?
Yes, and I'm going to start with a really personal example, probably the most personal example because it's about me, and then I'm going to talk about what I've seen for other women. So there was a very pivotal point in my career when I really came very, very close to dropping out, to feeling like I had failed and that they would be better hiring a man in my position, because I couldn't be there all hours of the night. I couldn't spontaneously get on an airplane. I didn't have the flexibility to be that kind of employee. And I hit a really pivotal moment where I felt like I needed to opt out. Thankfully, I had the most amazing boss. His name was Kevin. And I always say Kevin understood the impact of gender diversity even before I did. Because when I went to him and said, I think that you should hire a man in my position, he said, Susan, I already have 5 men on my executive team. I don't need 1 more man on my executive team. What I need is more women on my executive team. And if you can't be successful here, what message is that giving all the other women in the pipeline? So even on a day when you feel like you can't be 100% the way you want to show up at work, I want you here and I need you here. And he gave me that opportunity. He gave me that permission to show up differently than the men on the team. So when I wrote a book in 2009 called How to Become Successful Without Becoming a Man, and it really stemmed from that, because when I started in the business world, women were really told, behave like men, act like men, hope that nobody notices that you're female. And the Times did not talk about the business value of gender diversity. And so in that moment, when Kevin explained to me that I am a role model for all the younger women in the pipeline at our organization, and if I can't be successful there, then they can't either. And so it's very important that we understand the impact that women have on the organization. So for me personally, I was given an opportunity to show up authentically as a female leader and to not try and pretend that I led the same way as the male leaders. And if I hadn't had that opportunity, I would have never started Leadership One. I would have not been able to have the impact on the thousands of women who have been in the Leadership One program that I know we have helped. So I have seen firsthand when women are given opportunities, it's like throwing a rock into a pond, like the ripple out effect on my own personal life. We do know, the research is very, very clear that there's a business advantage of gender diversity. And so women are role models for other women. When women lead, there's all sorts of good things that happen. And so I think the most important part to me about giving women opportunities is, yes, you will impact that individual woman's life, but more importantly, you impact your entire business, because it is clear that there are business advantages of gender diversity. There are 6 overall areas that when you have more women at the top of your organization, you do better in the following 6 areas than organizations that have fewer women at the top. And those areas are 6 business things that all business leaders would want to have. Overall effectiveness of your organization, customer satisfaction, employee engagement, innovation, social responsibility, and financial strength. So giving an opportunity to a woman, yes, it impacts her life in a positive way, but it impacts your business in a positive way. And I think that's the message that sometimes gets lost when we talk about initiatives for women. We think of it only on that very individual or personal level, and I really try and educate everyone that impacting an individual woman impacts your business in a positive way.
Awesome. So just on a side note, I was also a part of your program Leadership One, and that's how I got to know you. And it's been 3.5-4 years, I think, since I was a part of it, and I have definitely seen a growth in me. And yeah, I'm just so thankful for you and your program. And women like you have paved the way for younger women like me, and that is why we do not see the kind of gender bias that maybe people would have seen 20 years back in their careers when they were starting out. Yeah. So thank you so much for that.
I love hearing that, Shamika, that making an impact, it's why I have the world's best job, because I get to hang out with amazing women like you every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so on to the third question. Susan, we have seen many, as you had also said, right? Many women drop out in their mid-career. Maybe they studied really hard, but then somewhere something happens and then they drop out. So just wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges or barriers that you see that women face? How do you address them basically?
Yeah, there's a whole sort of group of barriers that I'm not going to talk as much about because it's all the unconscious bias barriers. It's the likability penalty, the affinity bias, on and on and on. And I don't talk as much about those because those are huge and massive, and I, as an individual running a leadership program, can educate people about those, but I can't really change those. So they're there and we need to acknowledge that they're there. But I try and focus on the things that we as individual women can change and have an impact on. So the common barriers that I see are two big ones. The first one is, as women, we do not raise our hands often enough or soon enough for the opportunities that we want. We hold a belief that our hard work will be noticed and recognized and rewarded. And unfortunately, that's the world I would like to live in, but that is not the world that we live in. So the idea that if I heads down, I'm a good employee, I do my work, that somehow the promotions and things that I have earned will come to me. We want that to be true. But in fact, you have to let people know what your goals are, and you have to tell them often, and you have to tell many people. And one of the best pieces of career advice I ever got was never take a job that doesn't scare you a little bit, which I thought was crazy. Why would I want to take a job that scares me? And then I realized it's because I had this need to be perfect in my job. And I wanted to show up on day one of a new job and have people be wowed and say, we're so glad we hired Susan. Isn't she amazing? And I never looked at it a little bit more selfishly, which is, maybe I should take a job where there's growth opportunities for me. And so one of the barriers we have as women is this desire for perfection and a fear of being less than perfect. So we don't raise our hand and say, pick me for that promotion, pick me for that stretch assignment, until we are way overqualified for it. And so one of the barriers is from within us, that we need to raise our hands sooner and more often for the opportunities that we want. And that's something that we can completely control. And that's what I love about that, because that comes from within. I would say there are lots of reasons why we as women wait to raise our hands. We are rewarded from the time we enter preschool or kindergarten for behaving, sitting quietly, waiting till the teacher calls on us, and that was always rewarded. When you get into the business setting, that's why we think if we sit quietly, heads down, that we'll be rewarded. And so we have to really learn a new set of behaviors in order to get the rewards that we're looking for. So it's a little bit of a mind shift in that, but it's just a behavior that we can change. And so I love that. So that barrier is from within us, our own fear of taking a little bit more shots on goal, not always just trying for that one perfect shot, but really raising our hand more often and a little sooner. Never take a job that doesn't scare you a little bit. So that's kind of the first barrier. The second challenge that's a big one is the challenge for women to find sponsors. So lots of brilliant research about the difference between mentors and sponsors. And as women, we do not have the same access to sponsors that men do, because sponsors are often organic. And that thing I talked about earlier, the affinity bias, people tend to sponsor people who remind them of themselves when they're younger in their career. And so the more men you have at the top, the more they're sponsoring junior men. You have fewer women at the top, so you have fewer women sponsoring junior women. And by the way, it shouldn't just be women sponsoring women and men sponsoring men. We need leaders, which disproportionately are men, to sponsor men and women. But the affinity bias holds us back. So senior men are not intentionally only sponsoring men. It is through unconscious bias that happens. So we need to be more intentional about senior leaders understanding the importance, especially in career advancement for women and for underrepresented minorities, that we need sponsors, because sponsors are the springboard to career advancement. So that is a huge barrier, is that as women we have less access to sort of organic sponsorship. So it needs to be more intentional and perhaps a little bit more programmatic within an organization. We can't just wait for it to happen naturally, or it will happen more for the men than for the women.
Right. That is so true. And like coincidentally, I have made a video about different biases that we have, and affinity bias is something I did not cover in that. Yeah, there's so many such biases that we have, and each of us has to work towards it, and it all starts from within. So the final question to you, Susan, before we start the rapid fire. Susan, you just talked about how there are men in the majority right now in the leadership positions, and so somewhere there's an affinity bias, and then again more men come up in the senior leadership. But what do you think, what role do men play in promoting gender diversity and supporting women's career advancement, and how do you think we can engage them in this process?
You know, I love this question because it's one of the areas that most recently over the past couple of years I've gotten so excited about, because there's been a lot more research and there's been a lot more men writing about this, which I think is great, sort of how to be a good male ally. I always take everything from the perspective of assuming positive intent, and I think we have to start there. Any conversation we have about how we're going to engage men has to be from a place of no blame, no shame, assuming positive intent. So I truly believe that men did not create a work environment to intentionally exclude women, and I always start from that. Are there a few bad apples in every bunch? Of course. There's a few bad apples of men, a few bad apples of women. But in general, I believe, I'm an optimist, and I believe that most people are out to do the right thing for each other. I don't think that men know what to do. So I believe that the way we engage men is helping them understand the data as a starting point. Help them understand the business imperative for why they want gender diversity in their organization. So I don't approach it as it's the right thing to do, it's a fair thing to do. I think all those things are true, but I'm a scientist. I like data. So I like to present men with data about what gender diversity, what positive things it does for your company. And I like to start with that, because if I'm a leader in an organization and you tell me this is what we could do to make our organization stronger or more profitable or employees more engaged, well, I get excited about that. And if that happens to be gender diversity, great. So I really try and look at it as, what data can I give to the men that they get excited about wanting to be a part of? And then you have to give them very specific tools about how to engage. There's a data point that I find super interesting. So I'm going to read from it just so I get it exactly right. It says, research shows that when men are deliberately engaged in gender inclusion programs, 96% of the women in those organizations perceive a real progress in gender equality. So research shows when men are deliberately engaged, 96% of women believe that there's progress in their organization. This is compared to only 30% of women who perceive real progress in their organization without strong male engagement. So that to me is pretty powerful. If I'm a male in an organization, this says to me, I really want women to see that I'm deliberately engaged. So what could I do, right? If I'm a guy, what could I do? And there's some easy things that men can do, and then there are some harder things that men can do. So one is sponsor a woman. Look at your pipeline. Who's in your chain of command, who's female, who you see as having really top talent, and figure out how to spend more time mentoring and sponsoring her. That's what Kevin did for me in my career. So many things that I learned in business came from him taking the time to teach me those things. So that doesn't require anything other than you as an individual male reaching out. Give more visibility to the women on your team. So invite them to come sit in on a meeting where they can see how you're engaging with a client or some experience that they might not get in their day-to-day job. There are those individual things. Ask women, what do they see as the roadblocks? And can you help take down any of those roadblocks? Here's a common roadblock that happens all the time. A man sets a meeting at 7:30 in the morning because he's a morning guy. This was my very first corporate job. My boss was fantastic, great guy named John. He was a morning guy. He got to work really early in the morning, and our first meeting of the morning was at 7:30. I was a new mom, a very young child, driving very far to work, and having to be at work at 7:30 in the morning was incredibly difficult and stressful for me. I could be at work much later in the evening and be fine, but that morning, that started every morning super stressful to me. I never felt comfortable saying to John, could our first meeting be at 8:30? Does our first meeting of the day have to be at 7:30? I never felt comfortable saying that. In hindsight, I wish that I had said it. And I think that we've come further in our business culture where these conversations can happen. I think especially now that work is in hybrid and remote and all sorts of scenarios, I'm very encouraged by the fact that I see more people talking about how I fit work into my life. Because at the end of the day, we only get one life and work is a part of it. But the idea that we can compartmentalize work and life, the nice part is I think those conversations are becoming more commonplace. And so as men, have those conversations, right? Figure out, is there some barrier I'm creating that I didn't even realize was a barrier? Those are the small things that have huge impact. Then what are the big things that men can do? If you have any opportunity to influence budget, put budget behind initiatives that retain and advance women. Do not just expect women in their employee resource group to fix this problem. This is not a female problem. This is a business problem. So employee resource groups are great and women need to hang out with women, and I love all that. But what I hate is when there's no budget put behind this and yet a company says we care about it. Companies put money behind what they care about. So if you are a male leader and you have the opportunity to influence budget, put budget behind retention and advancement of women. That's what men can do.
Yeah, that's really some strong action points. I hope men are listening. And actually, it's not just a bias in the mind of men, but even we carry bias, right? As women, we think,
Yes.
oh, there's certain things that we cannot do, and the perfection bias that you mentioned, that's something we all women should get over. You hit a nerve when you said about the perfection bias. I think all women are guilty of it. I sure am.
Yes, yep, it's one we all share. We're in good company, right?
Yeah, this is just lovely talking to you, Susan. Now we are going on for some fun. So I'm gonna throw at you some quick questions, and I hope you can answer them quickly. So Susan, let's get on with the rapid fire questions. Question number 1: describe leadership one in one line.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and describe it in 2 lines because Leadership One is sort of a dual impact program. So there's really the impact to the individual women and there's the impact to the companies. And so it's hard for me to come up with one line for both. So I would say Leadership One in one line is that gender diversity is a business advantage. So that's what I say to companies. Gender diversity is a business advantage. So Leadership One is all about helping you get that business advantage. When I'm speaking just about the impact to individual women, I would just use our tagline from Leadership One, which is success and sanity for professional women.
Yeah. Okay. The next question. What advice would you give to women who are aspiring to reach leadership positions in their organization?
Do everything possible to find a sponsor. If you don't really know what that means, there is an incredible book by Sylvia Ann Hewlett called Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. I think I actually have it sitting here. I have some of these books sitting here. I'm going to reach out in a second. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Forget a mentor, find a sponsor. And really understand what a sponsor is and then figure out how to get one. It's just the springboard to advancement.
Yeah, that's one solid advice. Okay, the next question is, are there any specific trends or emerging practices in the field of gender diversity and women's career advancement that you find particularly interesting or promising?
So there's one that I find interesting and one that I find promising. They're not necessarily the same.
Okay.
I would say what I find most promising is that, and this was even pre-pandemic, this generation of men, the newly graduate entering the workforce generation of men, are asking for things that were typically seen as what women wanted. And anytime something is seen as what women want, it is dismissed and not taken very seriously. So things like, I'd like a more flexible schedule. I would, like to not spend 14 hours a day in the office. Those were seen as what women want. Now they're seen as what your top performing male graduates entering the workforce want. And so it erases that it's what women want, and I see that as super promising. It also is a bit of a dagger through my heart, because why does it have to be suddenly men are asking for it, so now it's legitimate? So there's part of that is, a bit frustrating and irritating, but I'm going to get over that and just say this is good. I think the workplace is changing so that it is not success at all cost, right? So I see that as very promising. What I see as interesting, and only time will tell, but I'm incredibly fascinated by what remote and hybrid work will do for women's advancement. And I will say I'm perhaps not as 100% optimistic about it as some people are. I know enough about the research and I know enough about unconscious bias to say that I worry that not having FaceTime will allow all of the unconscious bias and the affinity bias and all the other biases to creep in a little bit more, and we will kind of get back to women being dismissed for promotional opportunities because they're not right in our face every day in the office. I also worry a little bit about something called the location bias, which is now being talked about and studied. If we have hybrid work allowed for everybody, who utilizes it? And if it turns out that men are all coming back into the office and women are using hybrid work and coming less, this location bias will creep in, and we know human nature is we value the things that we see on a regular basis. And so I find it interesting, and I will say I'm just not 100% certain yet that we won't see gender bias creep into hybrid work, and how if women use it more than men, I think that we're going to be in trouble. I'm hoping that men and women use it equally, but only time will tell.
Yeah, there's some reality check there. So on a lighter note, Susan, are you a reader?
Oh my gosh. Okay, if you could see my office here, it's covered in hundreds of books. I'm an obsessive reader. Mm-hmm.
So who's your favorite author, and which is the one book that you would recommend everybody to read?
Okay, so that's like picking your favorite child or your favorite dog. It's impossible. It's impossible. So I will say I'm going to list two people who I think are so brilliant that I can't pick. Okay, Sylvia Ann Hewlett. Go read anything written by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. So forget a mentor, find a sponsor. Brilliant. She's brilliant. So that's one. Deborah Liu wrote a book called Take Back Your Power, and she, is comes from a total tech background. Amazing, this whole idea of take back your power. So Deborah Liu, she's brilliant. There are two more that I just have to name. Okay, books are my thing. Susan Cain, if you've never read her book Quiet, it to me is the most brilliant business book that just shattered the way that I thought about leadership and leading people and management and everything else. So for anyone who doesn't understand sort of the idea of introverts and extroverts and ambiverts and what that means in a workplace, it's so critical to how we lead. And that all came from Susan Cain, C-A-I-N. Her book's Quiet. She has TED Talks. Go watch it. She's brilliant. But I'm going to say the must-read book for all women it's called How Women Rise. It is just so brilliant. It's by Sally Hegelson and Marshall Goldsmith. And it is the most can-do book about behaviors that we hold as women that hold us back in the workplace. And they're simply behaviors, and behaviors you can change. Behaviors are like biting my nails. It's just a bad habit. So these are not things we're born with. This is not our intrinsic personality. These are just bad habits that we have that hold us back. So How Women Rise is a must-read for all women. And I'm going to leave with one final plug. It's the Standout Assessment. Gosh, I have that book sitting somewhere right here too. It is a free assessment that you used to have to pay a fortune for. Oh, I see the book. It's propping up my phone. There it is. So I can't show you the book because it would move my phone. It's Marcus Buckingham. It's called the Standout Assessment. You used to have to pay for it. During the pandemic, he offered it for free. I checked today. It's still available online for free. It's at the Marcus Buckingham Company. So it's tmbc.com, and it's called the Standout Assessment. Go take it. It will teach you so many things about your personal brand that you will be thrilled to know.
Wow.
See, I couldn't give you one answer. Books.
Yeah. Yeah, the rapid fire question turned into a lengthy one. But just to add, I mean, just as an observation, all the books that you mentioned are by female authors, and there's only just 2 books that I have read right now which were written by women. One is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown, and the other one is I read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. I really loved reading from women's perspective, right? It feels like you can connect more.
Yes.
So, one final question. What is the one mantra you swear by and urge others to do so?
I love the idea of find what brings you joy and do more of that, which isn't necessarily a work mantra, sort of a life mantra. Find what brings you joy and do more of that. I would say my work mantra is to find your cheerleaders. Find the people who believe in you before you believe in yourself. It's just so important. And then when you get to the point where you believe in yourself, you be a cheerleader for others.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. And I also truly believe in the first part that you said, find what truly brings joy and you'll be really leading a happy life. And that's what I did today morning, 7 a.m. I'm shooting this video with you.
Yes.
I'm so glad I could do this, and this is what brings me joy.
I know.
Yeah.
I every day to think about like how we're going to support women supporting other women. It's my favorite thing. Yeah. It brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, and it brings me joy to talk to you, Susan. I cannot tell you, I think it's been 5 years since I was part of Leadership One cohort, and I've been looking up to you ever since then. I've been following you on LinkedIn, reading all your posts, and I'm so glad that you actually took out the time to talk to me.
Oh, I was happy to. Thank you for asking me. Very happy to. I was honored that you asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and I hope we get to chat once again sometime. And I hope that our listeners and watchers, viewers have gained at least some insight into what gender diversity is all about. And it's not just about women helping women, it's about everyone helping everyone possible, just so that all of us can thrive and survive.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Susan. I hope you enjoyed this little chat with me as much as I did. That's it for this video. I hope the viewers also enjoyed this chat as much as we did. And please subscribe to my channel if you have not already. And I'll see you again next week. Until then, happy learning and bye. Bye, Susan.
Bye-bye.